Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to go over MSU's next game against the Fighting Illini of Illinois at the Breslin Center on Sunday. Before we start, just a quick word of thanks to new Scott Skyle supporter on Patreon, Connie Tucker. Thanks a lot, Connie. Appreciate your support. Which reminds me that we should quickly thank everyone who is a supporter of the show at the Team Cleaves level on Patreon: Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, Mike Huntoon, and Draymond Green supporters: Adam Wolzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Scott Driscoll, Doug Robinson, Daniel Dranak, and Joe Hollis. And all of those of you also on Scott Skyle supporters, as well as Rich Wagenheim and Kenneth Cremette on Substack. Also, thanks to all the awesome support, especially from former co-host Cam. Because of that, Rod and I will be taking a trip out to Los Angeles, which I think we've mentioned in passing a couple times, to catch the Spartans live at USC and UCLA. We will be attending the pep rally at the Lab Gastropub next to USC's, it's a Gainey Arena, right? That was called, from 11 to 12:30 Pacific. So we'll have some swag to hand out. I think we're trying to sort of set stuff up with the alumni club out there. So if you want to say hi or whatever, you can come by. And that's, I think, a block from the arena before the game on the 1st of February. And interestingly, it'll be the first time after 2.5 years that we'll have an opportunity to meet, both Rod and I. So we'll see. I'm not quite sure if you'll be like Madi Sissoko, where when he met me, the first thing he says, "Boy, you're a lot shorter than I thought you were." uh, yeah, because they always say, the camera adds a few inches, but I always thought it was your belly, not your height, right? So anyway. All right, well, let's talk about the game here against the Fighting Illini. I think it's fair to say that this is the first big game of the season since the Maui Invitational for the Spartans. Might be a very important game for deciding who wins the Big Ten. Certainly, if you win this game, you're in the driver's seat as far as Michigan State, at least in relation to Illinois. For Michigan State, they're carrying a 10-game win streak, sit at 6-0 in the Big Ten. They haven't played any teams in the conference with winning records. So I think it's fair to say, they're taking care of business, and you can only play who's on your schedule, which we've talked about before. But it's also fair to say that, they haven't played any great teams. And I don't think they've even played a team with a winning record in the Big Ten, like we mentioned before. Also, they've sort of been a little slippy in the second half, the last couple of games. And so it's reasonable to think that although we see lots of potential, and Tom Izzo certainly was justifiably concerned after the Penn State game with the very poor defensive performance in the second half. And you also saw a little bit of that Northwestern game, although that was a little bit more understandable. It's on the road. And also as a large lead going into that second half. So a lot of things on, at stake on Sunday.
Yeah, it's obviously it's the first Big Ten game that's felt big in this way. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think Maui felt, Memphis and North Carolina felt like big games. Kansas was certainly a big game, but this is the first game in the league. It's important because, as you say, you're playing against another contender. The other thing is Illinois is one of just 3 teams that Michigan State plays home and home with. So
right.
they're gonna visit Champaign in February. We know that's a difficult building to get a win in. And so it means finding a way to hold serve at Breslin, particularly when you're talking about matching up with Illinois directly. That's a big deal. So I do think there's pressure on to win this game that goes beyond just, well, you're 6-0 and you want to keep the momentum going. I think it's not critical. If you lose it, you got 13 games
just one
left,
game,
and you're still a half game ahead of them in the standings, even if you lose. But it matters. There's no sense in soft pedaling that. And I think it also matters too, because getting at something you were talking about, you've seen it a lot. If you have the misfortune to pay a lot of attention to social media, you will have seen today the floodgates opened from Illinois fans talking about Michigan State's schedule. And I do understand it. And it's not completely irrational to point out that Michigan State, as you said, has not played a team yet with a Big Ten with a winning record in conference play. Of course, they've contributed to the fact that some of those teams don't have a winning record.
Exactly.
And they've also buried a lot of those teams.
Yes.
But it's fine. I still think it's a legitimate point to make. You just can't go too far with it. If you're trying to win internet points based on that fact, you're living a sad life.
Yeah.
But yeah, game matters, no question.
Well, and I mean, we've seen plenty of times where you see a team that's 5-0 and you're like, they haven't played anybody. We have no reason to think they're very good. They haven't looked
Right.
good beating these teams. They've, beaten Minnesota by 4 and they've, squeaked out a couple home wins. You're like, this team's probably not that good, but they are 5-0. That's, worth something. But then we've seen that from Wisconsin a number of times where they just kind of were
Yep.
sort of flame out after a certain point in the season. And, especially with the 18, well, how many games? It's like 17
20.
games 17 games against teams you only play one time, right?
Right.
Is that right? No, that's not right.
No. It's
the
14. It's 14.
14. Yeah, there you go. 14. So it's going to be much more lopsided. It's going to be a lot harder to have sort of an equal, distribution of teams you play and where you play on the road, right? Like we've talked about it. Not as big a deal for East Coast teams, but certainly West Coast teams. It's probably a lot easier for them to fly into Minneapolis and play, Minnesota and Iowa than it is to fly in and play, Michigan State this year, for instance. That's, and I know where all the schedules are for all the teams. So anyway, it is a game that feels like I think we'll have a better. It's a good level set, I guess, for Michigan State. We'll see where they really are. We think they could be very good, and they have played really well, and the metrics look like they're pretty good. But again, you're playing against lesser opponents in the Big Ten, somewhat contributed because you're beating them. So, I mean, Nebraska is less than 500, but that's because one of the losses that makes them 2-3 instead of 3-2 is to Michigan State, right?
Right, and that's my point. I think that you're right to say there are times where you could have a 5-0, 6-0 team, and say, yeah, they've been playing bad teams and they've been pulling out some miracle wins, and we're just not sure how good they actually are. In my opinion, that is not Michigan State's profile,
right,
at all. I mean, we've seen enough over the years to know what it looks like when a team is playing well and when they're not. Or when it's a mirage.
Yeah,
there haven't been too many mirages at Michigan State, by the way. That's not something this program typically does. So, I would say the proper way of viewing this is you've got two good teams that both look like they're going to be in the mix come late February, and I think that's a reasonably likely outcome that they will be there in the conversation, both of them, come February. So that's to me that's where it lands.
Yeah, I think it's probably pretty safe at this point to say the 4 teams contending for the Big Ten title right now are Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan, and Illinois. I mean, I think
at the moment it looks that way, but you could
Maryland
put
in there too, right?
Well,
or Oregon
but
even.
No, because Maryland, because they've
he
taken
lost
too
to
many
Washington.
losses.
Yeah.
I would say the other teams that maybe are that next group down would be Wisconsin, and Oregon. But Oregon's got 2 home losses.
Yeah, right.
Which is
exactly.
a big negative. So, yeah, I think you've correctly identified the teams that, as of right now, feel like the 4 best.
They look like the best teams, yeah, as of we say now. And Michigan State has a 10-game winning streak, which they've not had for 6 years now, I think, since 2018 season. So it's been a long time. And as we mentioned, yes, they did not look good against Penn State last outing in the second half. Well, most of the game, at least defensively, for sure, even on the boards. And that game at Ohio State, those are 2 games that I think last year they lose, right? And now we're looking at a team that is 4-2 in the league instead of 6-0.
Yeah,
which is not terrible, but again, those are games that you think that they would not have pulled off. I don't think last year. They're the games that they seem to struggle with. So anyway, they're at least finding ways to overcome and win these games that you should win, but they're actually winning them.
Yep, that's it. That's why I say, yeah, you can talk about the schedule, but that's really very much a surface level kind of assessment. You have to actually watch the games, because even the margins tell a story, but they don't tell the whole story.
Right.
I think that when you watch the games and you see the way Michigan State has played against the vast majority of these teams, I mean, Northwestern's a good example. You say, well, it was only a 10-point. Well, where I come from, a double-digit win on the road against anybody is an accomplishment in this league. But if you watched that game, it was actually better than that.
Yeah.
It
Right.
really was. Their performance was better than that. So,
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is we just settle this on the court, which is nice.
by, and by the
And
way,
home and
Illinois
home.
Illinois lost at Northwestern too.
Right.
By the way,
Right. And to at home to USC. Now they were without
yeah,
Yakiona, so you could say
doesn't
that's
doesn't
a
matter. Does
but
not
yeah.
matter. That was a bad loss.
Yeah. That was definitely the sleepy we needed an Izzone or we need the alumni Orange Crush or something in the stands
Well,
because
that's
that
what I
was a
saw some of their fans
yeah,
saying
yeah.
is
They were
that
trying to figure
they
things out
felt
there.
like they just did not have the energy in the building for that one. So
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. So Illinois is 13-4 this season, 5-2 in the league. As we mentioned, their two losses. Uh, they're number 8 in Ken Palm. Is a comparison. Michigan State's number 14. So these are two very good teams.
yeah.
By the metrics on offense, Illinois is 22nd. Michigan State's 20th. They both are good against about everything save for 3-point percentage. Shooting, obviously, Michigan State is a good offensive rebounding team at 21st. Illinois is also very good at 26th. They're both good in from twos. Illinois is 51st in the country. Michigan State is 34th. They are good with free throw percentage. Illinois is 38th, which is very good. Michigan State is 4th, which is exceptional. They're better at least Illinois is better at protecting the ball and not turning it over than Michigan State. They're 60th in turnover percentage versus Michigan State is 166. 3-point percentage is not surprising, is better for Illinois than Michigan State. Illinois shooting 33.2%, which is not fantastic. It's
It's
okay.
not very good. It's in the
Yeah.
bottom half
Yeah.
nationally.
Yeah. There's, which is massively better than Michigan State, which is in the bottom, 20 out of
Yeah.
340 or so to 360 teams. Um, they also shoot a ton of threes. So although they don't shoot a high percentage, their volume of the amount is very, very high. So with the top 30 nationally and 3-point attempts per total field goal attempts. Michigan State is much less at 28%. They also have for the season, which is not good, but also very low ball volume, one of the lowest in the country, which is not unusual for Michigan State. And then, I mean, was 2 games ago, they were 4 of 8, I think, against was it Northwestern? Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
And then Michigan State is very good at getting to the foul line, which is unusual for Michigan State, as we've talked about many times already this season. They're 50th in the country getting to the free throw line. Illinois, pretty good, 114th, so kind of just middle of the road. And on defense, also teams are very good. Michigan State is 15th. Illinois is ranked 9th. They both do a very good job from 3. Illinois is number 5 at 3-point defense. They're number 9 at 2-point defense. Defensive rebounding, they're 4th. Michigan State's 25th against the 3, 59th against 2s, and 21st again on the defensive glass, where they've slipped quite a bit, as we've talked about, but still very good. Illinois doesn't foul a whole lot while they're play defense. They're 44th. Michigan State, thanks to Penn State, I think a decent amount, is now 127th when it comes to fouling while defending. Otherwise, they're before that pretty good. And let's see. Illinois doesn't produce a lot of turnovers. They're very passive. They're 330th in turnover percentage, which is almost last in the country. Whereas Michigan State's kind of middle of the road, 172nd. Illinois is 344th in steal percentage, which again is almost dead last. While Michigan State's 273rd. Illinois doesn't have a lot of rim protection. They're 140th in blocks, whereas Michigan State is quite a bit at 15th. And then Illinois plays fast, which seems to be the case for a while now. 14th overall tempo, 17th in average length of offensive possession, and Michigan State is 139th and 91st, respectively, just a comparison. So two teams that have fairly similar profiles. They obviously have similar talent in the sense that they're both in a major conference. And the only weird thing about Illinois that I'll say is, and at this point, I think you have to give Brad Underwood a lot of credit, that he's able to go to the portal, bring a collection of players a number of years in a row who are different, can't play the same way. Like he doesn't have like a style in some respects, and yet manages to put together a team and a strategy and get these guys working together, and they play winning ball. And he does it differently every season, at least for the last few years. So that's been very impressive. I mean, whether that's a way you want to make business, make your money. I mean, it's working for Underwood right now, and it's so anyway, it's been very impressive how he's managed to sort of pull that off, I think. because I think the other thing too is like to try and get all these different personalities from players you don't really know that well. You have, we've talked about it before. You have a couple week courting period, right? And then you have to get all these guys to work together and towards a common goal, however you want to play. So I've been very impressed with that.
Well, I'll give him his due. He's done exactly what you just suggested. He has assembled a roster that's very different from year to year, and at least the last 2 years. And really, I'll take it back further. I'll go back to the way his teams played when they had Dasunmu and
Mm-hmm.
Kofi Coburn and that group, which was the first time they got good under in his tenure.
Yep.
And then what they've done the last 2 years. Now, they've had some years where it didn't work. 3 years ago, well, two seasons ago, it didn't work. So any talk about Brad Underwood being the wizard of the portal and whatever, please spare me.
Yeah.
But he's done a nice job more often than not. I will
Yeah.
give, which is about as much as I think you can give anybody credit for in that environment. I still highly question whether over the long term, reinventing a roster year after year after year is an approach that's going to produce the kind of results that he wants and their fan base wants. But
Mm-hmm.
they were very good last year, and thus far they've been very good this season. So credit to him. And as you say, the other interesting thing about it is, unlike most coaches, he's not really recruiting to a system,
Yeah.
to a style of play. Last season, they played significantly slower than they are this year. They didn't have nearly the same reliance on shooting the three that they do. Um, it was much more of an NBA style. Try to find a mismatch in isolation and exploit that physically. So if you remember, they try to get Coleman Hawkins isolated on smaller people. They
Mm-hmm.
try to get Domask isolated on smaller people and let him back people down, and he could make plays from the foul line on in. Try to get Terrence Shannon isolated and let him blow past people. That was their offense. This year, it's not that at all. There's much more movement. There's much more flow. Again, they're looking to shoot threes. They shoot a ton of them. Michigan State will not see a team, at least in the regular season, that shoots more threes as a percentage of their overall attack than Illinois. So, and they're playing faster. So, year to year. And then you go back to like those Coburn teams, because they had Coburn. It was a lot of slow it down, play through the post,
Right.
let him, again, another different approach. So credit to him. I'm not in favor of that, in the sense that if I've got a coach who has real belief in what he wants to do, I'd rather see him keep doing that rather than having to constantly reinvent, because I think over the long haul, you're going to come up snake eyes at some point when you're doing that constantly, right? But
Yeah.
but when you keep pulling it off, okay, got to tip the hat, and that's I find myself in that spot a lot with Brad Underwood. I mean, over the years, I listen to some of the things he says, and I question a lot of it. I look at the way his teams play at times, like when he first got there, and I really questioned it, and I was right. Because you can't play that way and win in the Big Ten. You just can't do it. He realized that eventually, but yet I can't dispute the fact that his teams have won a lot of Big Ten games in the last few years.
They might have the best winning percentage in the last
Purdue does.
6 years. Oh, well,
Purdue,
Yeah,
Purdue
because
is
the last
number
2
one.
years. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Purdue's, well, even before that, Purdue's clear cut number one. But Illinois would be up there, probably competitive against anybody else.
Yeah.
And look, you got to give him his due. So that's kind of where I sit. I think this team is playing a style that's suited to the roster.
Yeah. Well, and then I guess we'll just break it down by offense and defense. So offensively, as you said, they shoot a lot of threes. They don't get to the line very often. So, in contrast to Penn State, just listening to that, you think, well, it's probably not a team that's going to drive a lot, but it's probably a team that's going to, if anything, maybe with their good offensive rebounding, maybe they kick out for threes and things like that. But it's not a team that's going to try and take you off the dribble much.
That is correct, and their style of play is reflected in some of the numbers you see. So, for example, you pointed out they're not terrible in terms of getting to the line, but they don't get there the way Michigan State does.
Yeah.
Well, I think a large part of the reason for that is the fact that they take a lot of threes.
Yeah. Right.
So when you're almost, I mean, they're at slightly over 48% of their total shots are from three.
Wow.
So it's heavy, and they're not as you noted, they're not like a dead eye team. Now the math works out that way. If you can shoot 33%, that's equivalent on a 3-point shot to shooting 50% from two.
Right.
So that means that's okay. Now, good teams would like to shoot better than 50% from two.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's the total story. We'll just hit a third of them and you're good. You'd be good some of the time, not all the time. But that's their approach. And when you're that oriented, when you're taking that many shots from three, well, those are shots that are not available to be taken penetrating, right? And they're not getting to the free throw line a lot. So that tells you, that's another indicator they're not doing it. That's not to say that they're incapable of doing it. I don't think this is a particularly gifted team athletically. I think they've had more athletic teams than this one.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they're painfully slow or anything, don't get me wrong, but they're not as athletic as Michigan State, man for man. They're not. But it wouldn't surprise me if Michigan State were to really sell out to try to take away the three, which I don't think they're going to play it quite that way. But let's say they did. Is Illinois capable of making you pay for that by slipping guys to the rim, kind of the way we saw Penn State do it yesterday? Yeah, I think they are. So it's not that they're totally incapable of playing inside the arc. It's that's just not the way they've preferred to play with this group. And for the most part, you can't argue with the results. The results have been pretty good.
Well, we talked about offensive rebounding. They're 26, so not quite as good as Michigan State, but pretty close. I mean, almost the same.
Yeah.
And they're taking lots of threes. Do you think their offensive rebounding rate is somewhat reflective of the fact that they're getting long rebounds and it allows opportunities for their guards to get rebounds more than in a traditional sort of mix of shots, I suppose?
Yeah, some of their guards definitely have good rebounding numbers. They spread it around. They're not like they're not a team where one guy's getting 13 boards a game and then everybody else divvies them up. No, they've got a lot of guys in that 5-ish realm, and some of them are guards. Jacku Silionis is an example. Their point guard, who's 6'6". He's big enough anyway, but he's over 5 rebounds a game as a point guard. Just as an example. So yes, I think that has played into it. The other thing I wanted to say about them at the other end too, so we talked a lot about the offense.
Yeah, right.
As you noted, this is a very, very good defensive team, which is what made what happened to them against USC just inexplicable to me. That's why I don't accept Jacku Silionis didn't play. That's irrelevant. That's not why they lost. They scored 72 points. They were okay offensively. They couldn't guard. USC is a rough offensive team. Rough. They don't have a point guard, but they were it was layups and dump offs the whole game.
Yeah.
Illinois just didn't, and I don't understand it because other than that game throughout this season, you are talking about an Illinois team that has been lights out defensively.
It's funny because that's the only game I saw was the USC game. Like,
no, they're much better than that.
Yeah.
You look at those numbers. I mean, they're top 10 against both threes and twos and in terms of defensive rebounding. If you do those three things at that level, you are a very good defense.
Yeah.
Even without creating turnovers, even fouling maybe a little bit more than you'd like to. You do those three things to that level, you are going to be a very good defensive team. You can't help but be very good defensively.
All right. Well, let's go on and talk about the Brothers Who Just Do Gutters. Those are the guys. If you need to have any issues with your gutters, and I know it's winter and it's not raining, although you have certainly water is sitting on your roof in the frozen form. It will melt at some point. It's got to be ushered away from your foundation without causing problems. You need to make sure you have free and open gutters, free and open downspouts, and make sure that the water is carried away. So if you have any questions, problems with that, the Brothers Who Just Do Gutters are the ones to contact. If you've got the leaky gutters, or something, or you just want to put some leaf guards on because you're tired of cleaning them out, or you just want them to clean it out, they'll get up on the ladder and do that for you. You can get 10% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. Either Kurt or Greg, and either side of the say that they can take care of you. They also have great people, and they can do any job, whether it's your house, whether it's a business, they can take care of it. Even if it's like one section of gutter or a whole replacing everything, they can do it, whatever it might be. So stay off those ladders and let the pros do it, and stay out of the emergency room. So they sponsor the player that needs to be kept in the gutter, which I'm going to guess, but we'll see what you say, Rod. But we'll start with Kasparas Yakionis, 6'6" freshman point guard from Lithuania, which, before we go on, is very interesting. You're definitely seeing, we talked about this earlier, all these players from Europe coming now, and really guys who played pro or semi-pro out in Europe. Absolutely. And now they're coming in. This is one of the things that will have to be addressed at some point, I think, with college basketball, when they get around to when they figure all the things out as far as contracting and,
well,
whether we're going to actually have students or they're just going to be athletes. I mean, I guess maybe we have to just decide that at some point.
I saw an interview with this kid it was translated in English from a Lithuanian basketball reporter who was over here visiting him. This was within the last week or two. So it was while he was suffering that forearm injury that kept him out for a while. And no offense to the kid, I'm sure he's a nice kid, and I'm sure he's, he may well be a diligent student while he's here, but man, it could not have been more clear what the purpose is. And that's fine, because that's been the truth that we've kind of lived in denial of for much of the last, 40, 50 years.
Right.
So I get it. But, it's just for it to be that blatant, it was whatever. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to cast aspersions on the kid, but it just, it read in that way to me. And it's like, well, you never read that shit with Michigan State. You just wouldn't.
Yes, but I think Michigan State, in that respect, is a little bit different than most.
They
most
are.
Programs.
They're an outlier, but in any event, look, he's a very good player. He came up through Barcelona's system, through their program, so he's played at a high enough level to know what he's doing. He's been well coached. For a freshman, he doesn't look like a freshman.
No, he's not.
He's not.
Yeah.
His game is very mature. Anyway, you haven't gone through the numbers yet.
I'll just go through. I'll go through briefly. So, of course, the big news from Yakionis is that he had this strange forearm injury that he sustained sometime after the Washington game when they were out west. He missed a couple games. He missed the Penn State game, and then he missed the USC game, which I mentioned earlier. They gave him the loss. So Penn State, he was missing. They blew out Penn State by, I don't know, it was like 30-some points or something like that. And then he missed the USC game. They lost at home to USC by 10. It was a very strange injury. It wasn't listed as a fracture, as a sprain, or anything like that. It just was kind of this, I just say it's mysterious. And they said he was day-to-day, and I had some suspicions what it was, but, I mean, apparently he's back, which, I'm not going to go into much more speculation except to say that he's back and he played and he looked fine with last time he played.
Can I ask you a question about that, though?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a phenomenon that, in your experience, the one you described to me, could repeat? Like, could come back? Is it known to do that?
Well, I mean, so I thought, I was suspicious, and I talking to his friends, and I'll just tell you, I thought he might have a complex regional pain syndrome, or the other thing is he could have an autoimmune sort of. It was hard because there was nothing reported, and so you just kind of like this.
Other than this, they did
Sasquatch pictures, like
but they did say it was inflammation. It was not a fracture, it was not a break, it was not a sprain, it was nothing like that. It was inflammation, was how it was described. So when you say autoimmune, that gets into that realm, right?
It certainly could be an autoimmune thing, either a skin like a dermato something or other, or it could be a an arthritic thing. It could be, but it could just also have been tendonitis, although you'd think they usually would say that it's tendonitis.
Right.
So if it's a complex renal pain syndrome, essentially what that happens is that someone has a nerve damage, a strange nerve reaction, an autonomic nerve damage, usually after an injury a prior injury. So let's say you fractured your wrist. 3 years later, you bump that wrist somewhere. It can be you can either refracture it. It could be like a major trauma, or it could be something really very minor, like you just fell down in the ice or something like that, fell in your hand, and then you have sort of an overreaction sort of to your inflammation in that nerve distribution, and it can be debilitating. It can cause all kinds of strange swelling. It can cause abnormal amounts of pain, temperature changes in your hand, all kinds of really weird stuff. And it's not super rare. It's rare, but not super rare in the sense that, like if I'm talking about it, it's not like as we joke about medicine, it's not like a complete zebra. It's, if you hear hoofbeats, it's probably a horse, but sometimes it can be a zebra. So it's something that you see on occasion. It's not easy to treat. If you treat it early, it usually is effective, but it can recur. And so but I don't know what it was. And so I'm not, so it's possible that whatever it is can come back. I mean, anytime you have inflammation, the inflammation can come back, right? Like almost everyone's suffered some sort of like tendonitis or like, a tennis elbow or something. And then it gets better, but then you go out and you play 36 holes of golf, or you play basketball for 6 hours. And then suddenly it sort of flares up and you got to, it causes problems again. People have this with their back problems all the time too, right? So you can have these sort of minor injuries that sort of can linger or can recur. And you'll see this all the time with players. They have a groin injury, they get over it, and then it sort of recurs, right? And so so anyway, all this to say is he's playing as far as we know, and he should be fine. But, who knows what's going to happen down the road. But for now, he's playing and he's very good. He against Indiana, where they just clobbered Indiana and in Bloomington, causing the students at half was like almost a 40-point lead at halftime. It was like 60-20 or something. It was crazy. They scored 60 points in the first half, which is insane to do that on the road, especially.
Cleared out the student group.
Yeah, they're chanting fire.
I saw photos that
early
in the second half, it was cleared out.
Yeah. So he had 21 points, had 3 rebounds, had 5 assists. He averages 16.7 points for the team, which is tops in the team. 4th in the team in rebounds at 5.5. Shoots 50, 42, and 87. Has 5 free throw attempts a game. Has, about 5 assists a game. He does average 4 turnovers. So that's his one sort of, kryptonite, I guess you'd say. For everything else, obviously with those sorts of numbers and his size at 6'6" and ability to handle the ball and shoot, I mean, he's clearly an NBA prospect, a possible lottery pick going into the spring, assuming, whatever this injury is, clears up.
He's probable lottery pick at this point. He's a pro. When you see him play, he's a pro. Now, that doesn't mean he's flawless. It just means that when you watch him play, you're seeing a guy who's on his way to another level when this year is done. It was always understood he was a one-year guy. And I don't think there's anything in terms of the way he's played that will serve to alter that. So, very impressive player. I would describe him as a streaky shooter. When I've seen him, he gets on a run like he did in the game against Indiana, where he hit like 3 triples in a row in a very short period of time. That's more the kind of shooter he is than, a Bryn Forbes, like just dead eye, no matter what kind of guy. He's not that. So good shooter, but as I say, a little streaky, very capable playmaker, but also prone to make some mistakes. I'll be interested to see how Michigan State guards him. I could see, it's hard to know with the lineup they play. I might. It'll be interesting to see. I'll leave it at that. It'll be interesting to see how they go, because they really only play one smaller guard, and of course we know Michigan State starts 2 smaller guards.
Right.
So, and even Jaden Akins is, on a good day, maybe 6'4".
Yeah. Right.
So at 6'6", Yakis Leonis is going to be a tough cover physically. But the upside to it is most of what he does is actually on the perimeter. It's not like he's playing a lot like Domask was last year, where he's backing people down and doing a lot of that. So how much how much his size advantage will play is to be determined. But really good player. I like watching him play. I like his style and his game, and so we'll see what happens. But very effective.
Next up is the only short guard, as you're referring to, Kylan Boswell, 6'2 junior, transferred from Arizona. He's originally from Champaign-Urbana area, so he's averaging a little under 12 points a game, shooting 36, 27, and 78. Averages 4.5 assists to 2.25 turnovers a game, and he also leads the team in steals at 1 2/3, and has a lot of free throw attempts at 81.
Yeah, he's the one guy who's I think of among their perimeter guys is a little more prone to be dynamic, to be looking to get to the rim. I mean he's a little over 4 free throw attempts per game. So it's not going to remind you of Melo Trimble, but it's good. He's a good player, and came home, had started his career out at Arizona, had played very well for them his first 2 years. I certainly remember him from the game last year. Michigan State saw Arizona in the non-conference, but he came home, and he's been an important addition for them. I think because of those other things he does, that he gives them maybe a little better decision making as a playmaker than Yak does. He's their most disruptive defender on a team that very much does not disrupt much in that way. By which I mean they're not going out taking the ball away from people. They're not blocking shots. They're just playing solid, sound defense, and they're doing it extremely well. But he's the one guy who's maybe a little bit of an outlier to that. And he's been an effective enough scorer, in part because of that downhill ability. What he has not been is a consistent jump shooter.
Yeah.
And so, that would be the weakness thus far. But he's a guy who's capable of hitting shots. So don't think that he can't hit threes. It's just his like a lot of the Michigan State guys. I would compare it to, somebody like Jaden Akins. He may still be under 30% on the year. I don't think of him as that poor of a shooter. We know he's capable of being better than that. Boswell would seem to be somewhat similar to me in that respect. Like if you told me, he went 3 for 6 in this game, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, right. Well, and in defense of Jaden, not that you're tagging, but he's 41% from 3 in conference play this year. Conference play, so at least he's
absolutely.
Next up for guards, the wing is Trey White, 6'7 junior, transferred from USC. So Michigan State saw him in that tournament game a couple of years ago. He's averaging a little under 11 points a game, 5.5 rebounds a game, shooting 51, 27, and 88.
Yeah, nice overall player. Really like him. He's kind of a jack of all trades type, a little bit of toughness. A little bit of athleticism. Again, for a team that I don't think of as being particularly athletic overall, he is. He's a good athlete. So, yeah, nice player, important player for them. Yeah, good addition. It worked.
And then at the 4, Ben Hummerkus, 6'9", 220.
Hummerkaus. This is a team. Hummerkaus. This is a team that's got a few names that I
made sure I got Yakionis right.
Yeah, you got because I was leaning on the J earlier. Yeah, so I'll take the hit on that one.
I have no Slavic. No Slavic ancestry.
Got one more to go.
I'm good with that one. That's an easy one. I think.
Right.
So Ben Humbergus, he's a 6'9", 225 senior transfer from Evansville, from the Missouri Valley. He was Missouri Valley Newcomer of the Year last season, so he's a guy clearly is like moving up, right? So he was. That's a just example as we talked about many times. With these players.
Not just that. He was Newcomer of the Year last year in Evansville, and he's
but he was obviously a senior, right? Yeah, so he must have.
So where was he before that?
He was an NAIA, right? Yeah.
That's right, at Huntington College for his first 2 years. So we've talked a lot about this, although maybe a little less since we've hit Big Ten play. But here we are back again. A guy who went NAIA to a mid-major to a good high major.
Yeah.
In the course of 3 years.
Well, and maybe he has another 2 years left, right? I mean,
I think he's done. Well, unless, yeah.
I mean,
you're right. You're right. We can't. He's supposed to be done. We'll see.
He's averaging a little over 9 points a game, 3.6 rebounds a game, shooting 43, 37, and 67. So he is mainly an outside shooter despite him being 6'9".
Yeah, it takes a lot of threes. That's his game is as a stretch player. Can give him a little bit of rebounding. He offers some decent size defensively at that spot. He's the thing I like about it is when he's playing the four, I feel like that's a man because we didn't really spend a lot of time talking about it, but I did think yesterday against Penn State, we saw for the first time in a while, I felt like we saw Jax get taken advantage of a little bit. Penn State
Yeah.
doesn't really have a traditional four. It's a lot of like 6'6" guys who have a little bit of a handle, like a Zach Hicks, like a Kern. They can go off the dribble, and they gave Jack some trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yep.
Hummerkaus is the kind of guy who Jax can handle pretty easily. Doesn't mean he's
Yeah.
going to shut him down, but at least physically, there's not a lot of threat of a blow by.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. And he can definitely guard the guys on the perimeter a lot better. I think.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sure he's
Yeah,
good
he'll
for
be. I'm
ball
fine
screens.
with him on that. Yeah, handling ball screen stuff, at least generally.
Yeah.
But it was just that Penn State game for the first time in a while. We saw Jax dealing with some matchups that, maybe were a little more like what we'd feared we'd see a lot this year, and we really haven't, which
Yeah.
is the blow by. This is not that situation. Now, they'll play other guys who maybe are a little more prone to being able to do that, but not Hummerkaus.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Michigan State team this year is so much not. They at least have answers to lots of these, whereas last year they didn't have as many answers, right? So that's been a big advantage.
100%.
Probably reason they're 10-0.
They are not locked in to having to play any one way, which is always an element of the really good Tom Izzo teams, is that they can play any style you want. This team, even more than some others, can also mix and match personnel.
Yeah,
it's more than
pass,
just
for sure. Yeah.
More than just a stylistic thing. It's a hey, we can match up with whatever you've got in terms of physical trait, skill sets, whatever,
Yeah, it's like a junk drawer. He just can pull out something.
Yeah,
it's always in there. Whatever you need is there somewhere.
There's a tool for the job there somewhere. Yep.
Yeah. Finally, with a 5 is Tomislav Ivizic, 7'1", 255-pound sophomore. He's from Croatia. Obviously, big guy. 13 points a game, averages almost 9 rebounds a game, and 1.5 blocks a game. So he's pretty much the rim protection. He's shooting 51, 37, and 77. And he does try a lot of threes a game, about 4 a game. So he's definitely a threat from outside there.
He hurt Indiana badly. He also, like his running buddy, his European running buddy at the point, he kind of got on a heater for a while. And there was nothing Indiana could do because Ballo wasn't going to extend. Michigan State's got guys that can extend, so it'll be a little different story. But look, he's a very good player. But bottom line, he's a very good player.
Yeah.
And I think that he's probably, although I haven't seen it consistently dealt with as much as with Yakosilionis, but I think he's going to be an NBA guy or a pro next year. I tend to think he's a one and done. It's interesting, there was a lot of noise about his brother who played at Kentucky last year and is at Arkansas now, followed Cal, who has been okay, but hasn't played as well as Tomas has. He's been really good and a big addition for them because they've got, between him and his backup, who we'll talk about in a couple minutes, Illinois got a really good combination going at the 5, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think we need to go into reserves to figure out the player who Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. I'll let you.
It's the kid at the point, obviously.
Yeah, Kasparis, yeah.
Yakosilionis. He's the guy who kind of makes it all go for them. He's their leading scorer. He's their leading assist man. Just a really good player, and he's a fairly obvious choice, I think.
We'll move into the reserves then. Will Riley, 6'8" freshman. He reclassified to join Illinois this year. He's averaging 10.5 points a game, 3.6 rebounds a game, and playing about 21 minutes. So shooting 39, 32, and 71.
Yeah. Solid play, I would say. And that's maybe not as much as people expected, but he was a very, very highly regarded freshman coming in, right? And he reclassed late, fairly late. It was fairly late in the summer, might have even been the early fall. And so all of a sudden he's playing this year. And it's possible, people talk about him as a future pro, but from what I've seen, as opposed to the two Europeans, I don't think he's nearly shown enough to suggest that he would go this year. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
No.
You could still have a decision get made and that's it. But even though the shooting numbers aren't great, they're solid enough. And he's, you talk about having another card to play the way you talked about Michigan State. Well, it's true for Illinois too. Riley gives them this other element. He could play some on the wing. He could also play the 4. And though he's not like a world-beating athlete, I'd say he's a little bit more athletic than Humrickhouse. And so he gives him a little bit of a different element there. I like him. I like his potential. And I think it's not that I've seen him get a ton of criticism from Illinois fans, but I think to expect more of a reclass guy, in most cases, in my opinion, reclass guys tend to underachieve relative to expectations.
I was going to say that seems to be the case more often than not.
And maybe he is a little bit, but not a lot. He's still, still scoring double digits, right?
Yeah, I see his 10.5 points a game is pretty good for a freshman.
To me, that's a success story.
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends how high you have to be
well,
successful.
Did you think he was going to be a lottery pick?
Right.
If that was your standard, then he's failed. But I don't think that was in the cards.
Next, we have Merez Johnson, 6'9", 250-pound freshman. He's the backup you mentioned earlier to Visic. He's averaging 5.8 points a game, 6.8 rebounds a game in only 15 minutes. So he is really rebounding at a high clip, shooting 63% from the floor and only 59% from the line.
Yeah, and he's particularly a load on the offensive boards. I saw him play once in high school. Actually, it was Jeremy Fears' senior year. He was St. Rita, I think, was the school he played for in Chicago. And he played very well in that game against both of the Fears brothers, came out with a tight loss. But you could tell he was probably going to be a good player. But he's honestly been maybe a little better than I'd even expected him to be as a true freshman, because he's really been solid for that team. I've been very, very impressed with the way he's played. As you say, only 15 minutes a game, and to be that good on the glass. And he's one of these guys that, he's not tremendously versatile offensively, but if he gets it deep, it's over.
Yeah.
He's going to finish. So a nice piece for them to have. And, you put a guy like him together with the starter, and that's a hell of a 1-2 punch. Like, there's no point in the game that you feel like, all right, we can really take a breath, and they've got a guy who's just kind of holding the fort down.
Right.
Different style, but both effective in their own ways.
Next is Jake Davis, 6'6" sophomore transfer from Mercer, where he was a starter as a freshman. He's averaging 2.5 points a game, 1.5 rebounds a game in about 9 minutes, shooting 38, 32, and 50, with about 2/3 of his shots being threes.
Yeah, and that was why he was brought in. He shot very well at Mercer as a freshman. Has not shot as well as I would guess they'd hoped so far, but he's capable. He's capable of hitting a 3. And not a heavy minutes guy, but he'll play some on the wing.
And finally, we have Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, 6'1" sophomore. He played last year sparingly for Illinois, kind of had trouble getting on the court. This year, he's playing 17 minutes a game, averaging 7.5 points, 45, 28, and 82 for shooting. A bad assist-to-turnover ratio, so he coughs the ball up a lot for a guard. 6 assists to 13 turnovers. But I think the brief part I watched in Indiana, he looked pretty good for a little bit.
Yeah, he's
USC game too.
He's not an on-ball guy. Okay, the assist-to-turnover ratio tells you that.
Yeah, right.
If you hadn't even watched, let's look at those numbers. It tells you not an on-ball guy. He's Not yet dialed in the 3-point jumper, but he's proven able to score inside the arc, and he's miles better than he was a year ago, where they really could have used, it seemed, a real guard just to soak up some minutes, and he just couldn't hold on to a role. So I think from that perspective alone, the fact that he's proven capable of earning consistent minutes on a good team is indicative of the fact that he's taken a major step forward. But I think he's got potential to maybe be even better from here. We'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to talk about who cleans the glass best. Obviously, for you and me, we're not out rebounding, but the guys who clean the glass best around where we are, the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, they're also in the Kalamazoo area. Give them a call. You won't regret it. You'll be glad you did. They'll get in the ladders again, just like the Brothers Justice Gutters. These guys are getting the ladders to take care of your house, whether it's cleaning, power washing, whether it's cleaning your windows, and they even do interior painting now. It's during the winter months. And so if you need something, you need to fix a room that was painted the wrong color, if you're like me and picked Friendly Frog when you shouldn't have, they'll come in and repaint that room for you. And they're not, like we talked before, they're not going to pick a color for you, but they will definitely fix your mistake. So contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They'll keep you out of trouble. They'll also get you 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find that ways to contact them and all our sponsors at our support page at the Final Four is on the schedule.com/support. There you can get the necessary links and find ways of getting hold of them.
Before you go into the picks,
Yeah.
I like the fact that you're actually getting this spot referenced, at least your discussions of it having to do with the paint color selection on the Spartan mag board. I thought that was pretty good.
Well, the great thing, the reason our sponsors like us this so much is because it is truly incorporated into the show, right? Like when I went to the game, people were, the guy in front of me, Bruce, he was super excited to meet the Brothers Justice Gutters who happened to be with me that day. I meet people and they say, "Oh, you're from the Final Four schedule. Do you have gutter problems?" I mean, it's very funny. They feel like I need to buy gutters or get my windows cleaned. So anyway, and the great thing is that I've used these services. They're all really good. I couldn't, when I meet people randomly that don't listen to the show, I tell them about these, if they need something clean or whatever, I'll recommend them because they do really good work, whether it's you need gutters replaced or you need your windows washed. I mean, these guys really do a great job. So, yeah, check them out. You won't regret it. You'll be glad you did. All right. So we're having our, who cleans the glass best for Michigan State. We changed the format to benefit Rod here so he can come back. You're now up 7-6. I kind of started to feel like this. So I don't know about you, but I have in Michigan, the weather changes frequently, right? Especially the spring and fall. Like, you have 70 degrees and then it's 30 degrees. I'm always dressing for the day previously. And so I'm like overdressed or underdressed every single time. I feel like I'm in this sort of, some sort of vortex here with rebounding. I'm picking the wrong person every time. So I'm probably gonna make the mistake again. And so I get my first pick, which is Kohler, which I still think is the right pick for the first.
Oh, it is. There's no question.
Yeah.
There's no question. I'm going because I think this shapes up as a real clash of the Titans on the boards. I'm going to go big. I'm going to go with Coop and Zapala.
Okay. And this is where I'm just going to go with, I think I'm going to just, oh boy, I thought I was convinced myself I was going to go with Fiddler, which again is like living in the past, right? Like he had 7 rebounds, led the team last week or last game.
Recency bias. Although I think with him, he's been rebounding better and he's been playing better, which means he'll be on the floor more often. That's the key.
Right. Well,
for this spot.
And I think, just what he seems more comfortable, like just more active. And so when you just rewarded. We saw that number 2 offensive rebounds he had the last game where he just was in the right place. Like he said, well, it's kind of lucky. Like there's some luck involved, but there's also, if you're just more active and moving around and hunting for it, it finds you. Right, exactly.
Let me give you one other bit of food for thought before you make your choice.
Continue to try and confuse me. Go ahead.
Illinois shoots 48% of their shots from 3.
Yeah.
So does that mean long rebounds? Does that mean that it could be a guard?
Yeah. Well, and that's actually why I was going to probably just go with Akins because I think he's going to be on the floor a lot.
I think that's a reasonable, defensible choice.
And he's, he had 6 rebounds last game. He's led the team in rebounds before the season. He's a guy who we know is capable of it. I think you could easily just go for Carr as well. And you could say, well, there may be some from a defensive standpoint, you might want him, especially if you have a little bit larger
Yeah.
lineup for Illinois that Carr might see some time. So I don't know. This is why this is, not any fair anymore. So I don't know them in favor of this new move. So you're up 7-6. Hopefully I come back. Now they get first pick. It seemed that before, like if you had first pick, you're going to win, but now it's kind of gone all over the place. But
Yeah.
I can't go. I can't get behind. I can't get behind you. I can't trade twos for threes, like Coach Garland says. All right, so 5 keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing, another one of the great sponsors of the show. I'm wearing their shirt right now. It's a really cool, super comfortable quarter zip. This is logo. Just you can't get that right now. We may have that available later this year. But anyway, you can get all kinds of different Spartan apparel, whether it's quarter zips, t-shirts, hoodies, jackets, really cool hats. They've got really anything you want, and super comfortable, very high quality stuff. You can get it. That's all made at Portland, Michigan. Gabe and Brittany, Spartan alums, started this business sort of on accident, and he's taken it because he just was printing. He was printing stickers for his wall, but they force you to buy 20 at a time. So he's like, well, okay, I guess I'll get 20. And then he sold the other 19. He thought, oh, business opportunity, like a true entrepreneur. So now he's got this large company where he's selling not only Michigan State, but all kinds of other schools in the state of Michigan, outside of Michigan, Wolverines, also Indiana, Iowa, as far as Big Ten teams, and then a bunch of other just random small teams in the country. So check it out at nudgeprinting.com. You get 20% off. You type in Final Four and checkout, and that's just one word. So they sponsor the 5 keys of the game for Michigan State, and this is a little bit different. It's different this year, or this game. They've kind of been somewhat not repetitive, but a lot of the same themes. But I think it's a little unique this time. Primarily, the first one is the obvious one: guard in the arc. We talked about how Illinois almost shoots 50% of their shots from outside the arc, so you obviously have to defend that well. If you can do that, you're going to probably shut them down. Just to give you an example, though, that to your point, they are kind of streaky. And so in the Indiana game, they shot 34%. USC, they lost. They shot 21%. Penn State, which they won, they shot 32%. Washington, which they almost lost, they shot 19%. And Oregon, who they just completely obliterated out in Eugene, they shot 55%.
Yeah, and that's
I would point out only one of those numbers is like fantastic. Like,
right.
34,
No, that's
32.
that's what I was going to say. They are not a team that's shooting 50%, shooting 20%. Most of the time, they're right around where they've shot on the seasonal average.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, you never know what you're going to get. You never know what you're going to get. And here's the thing. I think oftentimes what we talk about in these situations is, well, hey, you want to limit the number of chances that they get, right? That's the big thing. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to do that against this team, because they're so hell-bent on taking them, and they run their stuff in such a way that it's going to be difficult to do that. And if you do that, if you're really selling out, are you then making yourself vulnerable to them taking advantage of that? Because this is a team that, like Michigan State, starts 2 point guards,
Mm-hmm.
So there's that element you got to worry about. Are you setting yourself up for trouble if you're really selling out? So we got to see.
Yeah.
But I do think, because of the tonnage that Illinois shoots, if they have a day where they're like 40% plus, man, I don't know how many paths there are to beating them.
You better get a lot of turnovers or some other offensive rebounds to try and make up for it. Yeah.
Some weird stuff has got to happen to counteract that. Some unlikely stuff. So you've got to keep them at least somewhat contained. But again, the good news is they're not a team that goes out and regularly shoots 40% plus.
Right.
That's not how they do it. It's understanding them properly is they put a lot of them up and a few of them go in.
Well, that kind of brings us to number 2, the boards. These are both 2 very good rebounding teams. Illinois is top 5, and defensive rebounding, Michigan State's 20th. Michigan State's a little bit better, 21st on offensive rebounding. Illinois is 26th. So this is the thing, when they miss, you have to make sure they don't get a second opportunity to hit that 3. And also, can Michigan State get something done with extra opportunities? Because if you're trading twos for threes, you better be putting up twice as many twos than threes, right, to make up for that.
Yeah. Well, the big thing that I think Michigan State's going to find its way, even as good as Illinois is on the defensive glass. I think Michigan State will get some things done with its defensive rebounding. I really do.
You mean offensive rebounding?
Or offensive rebounding.
Right,
yeah.
Mm-hmm,
It's the part that concerns me a little bit more is the other end, just because we've seen slippage lately.
Yes.
That's the part that you are concerned about. And so Michigan State did a great job in the second half in shutting off Penn State's water. Can they carry that over? Because in this game, that's going to matter.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to matter.
And the third key to the game is transition. Michigan State did a pretty good job with transition game against Penn State. Obviously nothing against Northwestern, but this is a team that likes to play fast. And they're a really good defensive team. So obviously, if you can, as we've always said, Michigan State's good for their tempo to be the faster they play, the better they play. But also, just like shooting free throws, you want easy points, and transition is definitely where you can get some opportunities.
Oh, both teams play fast, but Michigan State is the better transition scoring team. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. So what you hope for is that the pace of this game allows Michigan State to play the way they want to and to do a little bit more damage. But again, big part of this, in order to be able to do that, got to control the defensive glass. If they're not doing that, if they're giving up a lot of offensive rebounds or even contested rebounds where they eventually get it, but not in a way that it's easy to get into the break, they won't maximize what they could have otherwise done in transition. Mm-hmm. So it's got to start with defensive rebounding, in my view.
Yeah, and it always amazes me. Oh, go ahead.
One other thing. The Illinois coaching staff is really well schooled. Obviously, they've seen Michigan State many times. The roster is not. They got two guys who have faced Michigan State.
Yeah.
Both of them were Pac-12 guys. Trey White saw them 2 years ago. Boswell saw them last year. One game each. That's it. So the coaching staff knows, and you would think they'll be able to impart the importance of getting back, but you never know when it's players out there. And, we're not used to saying this because traditionally, every Big Ten team had a certain amount of carryover on their roster, right? But now we're in this era where you could say, 11 out of 13 guys have never played them, And
so they've only played them, most of them just played once in a season, right? I mean, yeah.
Well, we're getting to that point, sure, with the way the schedule is now, with all the single plays. So, some things to keep in mind.
The fourth key of the game is the deep ball. This is not guarding the arc. This is actually Michigan State making a three, because they have been pretty good shooting the three from during the conference play. At least they were up 37%. I think they're down a little bit now because of the
probably
Penn State
mid 30s. Yeah,
probably 34 or something like that.
Yeah.
So better of late, not shooting great last game. So, and this is a game, look, you're playing one of the top teams. You can't be super deficient in any sort of area in a game and expect to win, or at least, win easily. Well, so you have to do it.
I think that, because Michigan State, the polar opposite of Illinois, Michigan State is, I think, one of the 20 lowest. They've got one of the 20 lowest percentages of 3-point attempts as a percentage of overall attempts from the floor of any team in the country. And that's why when you hear media figures, especially on TV, where it tends to be really dumb, just emphasizing that, call a spade a spade. Emphasizing beating on that drum. The thing that gets missed is, but they don't take a lot of them.
Right.
So if they were averaging 25 attempts per game and they're shooting 28%, okay. But when they're only taking 15, is it that big a deal? It matters, but it doesn't matter that much. And I think that's true when you're looking at this in a macro sense over the course of the season. I think, and this is honest to God, I'm trying to be as objective as I can here. The 3-point shot is traditionally not a huge part of the Michigan State offense if you're measuring it by percentages, how often they take a 3 versus how often they shoot a 2, how often they get to the foul line. This year, it's even more so in that direction. than usual. It's really not significant. But, I will grant those who harp on this that in a game like this against a team like Illinois, would their path to victory be much easier if they can do some damage from three? Without question. And I think it's fair to say they probably can't afford a 25% game. They probably need to be a little bit better than that. I don't know that they need to be 40%. I don't believe that, but they probably got to be a little bit better than they were against Penn State.
Well, it's actually remarkable that they scored 90 points against Penn State. Only 6 of 23 from three. So a poor percentage and pretty good volume.
I watched Tom Izzo's post game, and he was like in disbelief looking at the stat sheet in the post game presser at the fact that they managed to get 68 shots up from the floor with the way that game was played. It's crazy.
All right, so the fifth and final key to the game is the free throw line. So these are two teams that both shoot free throws well. Michigan State obviously is one of the best in the country, and certainly by as a measure of volume, they're probably best in the country as far as amount of free throws made per game. But so obviously a potential advantage for Michigan State. You assume, though we probably shouldn't assume that always that you're going to get the home whistle. But
no, look, they didn't get the advantage of that against Penn State. It was ludicrous. And I'd love to live in a world where that stuff didn't matter, but we don't. Let's deal in reality. We live in a world where in the Big Ten, you expect at home, you will get the benefit of the whistle and you will get some calls, which, by the way, matters because when you go on the road, you expect to not get as many calls. It correlates. So you can be pretty certain you're going to get screwed some in half the games. That means you better get the advantage in the other half, So that's kind of where it sits, right? Yep. And I think on balance, the season stats and the eye test both tell you that Michigan State is a team that gets to the line more often, and they get to the line more often because they play inside the paint more often than Illinois does. They're not taking nearly as many threes, so they're around the basket a lot more. That's going to tend to produce more contact, all else being equal. And with Michigan State, they've got guards that are aggressive and will look to create contact. Will go in there with intent. So that plus the fact that they're at home, they should have an advantage here. And if they can shoot it the way they've shot it all season, that could be very, very, very significant. For Michigan State. Very significant. Because we expect a close game, right? And we always say this. In a tight game, those little things, free throws matter, and that's become a real weapon for them. It needs to be in this one.
Yeah, it's how you can go 6 for 23 and still win a game.
Right.
Right.
Because all these other things are in your corner,
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess any final thoughts? I mean, I'm looking forward to the game. This is a game that I'm not super confident about. I probably shouldn't be as worried about. I shouldn't say worried, but I don't feel like I don't feel, like I said, I don't feel confident about the game. There's certainly Michigan State's an underdog at home with the.
No, they are they
2.5 point underdog, I believe. Torvik has them losing by a point.
Okay, you're probably right because they're rated, but I would think home court would have evened it out. I'm kind of
home court's worth a couple points, but if you look at the Illinois game, I think Illinois is like an 8.5 point favorite in Champaign, so that makes sense. That
I'm going to take a quick look while we're talking about it. Michigan State is a 2-point favorite according to Kent.
Oh, okay. Well, I take it back.
So that probably will mirror the Vegas line.
Yeah, usually the Vegas falls at Scissors. That Torvik's a little bit different, but different metric systems.
Yeah, it's a very tight game though.
Yeah, it's going to be it.
That's what it looks
like.
A
1 possession game. Of course, so did the Northwestern game. The Northwestern game obviously didn't turn out that way.
Yep.
But I'm excited for this game, and only that I think it'll give us a better look at who the Michigan State team really is. Like if they come out and if they were to win this game, it doesn't mean they're going to win the Big Ten or that they're going to go into Champaign and beat Illinois or go out west and go sweep the UCLA and USC games. But it definitely gives you a reason to believe that, okay, this is a team that's for real, that's going to battle for the Big Ten. And even if I guess you should say they lose a game, they still are not out of the Big Ten race, but it's going to make you just question, exactly what this how those teams can do. And I guess ultimately it just depends on how they play and how they look, what happens that
Yeah.
transpires during the game.
I I expect it to be a very competitive game. Um, I have a lot of respect for this Illinois team. I think they're very good. I think when you look at their profile and you watch them play, both of those things, you can't help but be impressed by the fact that there just aren't a lot of obvious weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
There's not very much that you look at and say, well, they just don't do that well, you know? And that's a major, major, major deal when you don't have a real identifiable weakness. Um, that said, I've seen this team lose, and I've seen this team lose to teams that are much, much worse than Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not. Don't go into this thinking, oh, Illinois is just a juggernaut. You know, they're not. They're not. They're a good team. They're a very good team. A lot of very good players. They do a lot of things well. But Michigan State's at home. I think Michigan State is all of those things also. And I expect Michigan State to win. You know, we don't do a lot of predictions on this show. We don't.
Right.
We rarely do. And I could end up eating it, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I expect Michigan State to win this game. I think that in some ways, look, the Penn State game is probably going to tell us one of two things. Either it's going to tell us that, well, that was the first sign of a midish season swoon, and
Mm-hmm.
they definitively, now it cost them a game, and they got to figure it out and get back on the beam. Or it will tell us that, hey, this was the best thing for them because it got their attention without taking a loss, and then they were ready for a team of Illinois' caliber. You know, I lean toward, with this group and what indications they've given us and what we've seen so far, I lean toward the latter being more likely. But you can't rule out. And hey, it could also be, by the way, the other possibility is Michigan State could actually play pretty well and lose.
Sure.
Illinois is good enough that if Illinois is really on it, they're just really on it. They're having one of those, a 40% plus day from three. Michigan State could play really well and not win that game. Right. So there's a wide range of possibilities. But if you're asking me right now, the most likely one is pretty much what KenPom has. I expect a very competitive, relatively high scoring, not crazy, because these are two very good defensive teams. So they'll make each other earn it. But I just think Michigan State's going to find a way.
Well, I was listening to Graham Couch, and he was talking about how he said there are a number of reporters who were kind of going a little crazy after the game, the Penn State game, with Tom Izzo in his presser, where he was pretty angry and kind of calling out his team for, and then himself, not motivated or whatever.
Yep.
But Couch is like, yeah, this is just on the calendar. It's be mad. And
yes, I saw him say that.
Yeah, whether they're up, whether they win by 20 or whether they win by, he's going to be upset, and what to try and get him sort of ready for this Illinois game. And just it was scheduled to happen. It just happened to be that they did play poorly in many aspects of the game. So we'll see.
Yeah, I want to. He's right. I know what he's getting at, but everything he said was merited.
Yeah,
there wasn't anything. There wasn't anything he said. He didn't have to make it up. You know,
right?
That's just not what happened. It was they played kind of a poor sort of game against a team that they should have handled a little easier than they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's the truth.
Yeah,
and but he's right in that he probably would have found things to say even if they'd won by 15.
Yeah, because his concern, and I know, because the guy's been coaching 30 years, so he knows all the sort of traps that happen during a season. You win a bunch of games, you move up in the rankings, people start talking about how great you are. It's easy to think you're great, and to kind of think you don't have to bring your A game, right? And so he's trying to prevent that from happening. They've won 10 in a row.
He is, but I think there's a couple of other things going on too. I think it's a sign of how much potential he believes this team to have.
Absolutely. I agree to 100% with that. Yeah.
So I think the other thing is, I think that he's got, even though it's not just freshmen and sophomores. It's a young team in the sense of the roles that guys are playing. He's got Jaden Akins and Trey Holloman, who maybe you could argue Carson Cooper, who are more or less in the same sort of role they've been in before. Other than that, it's all new. Even for guys who are back, Booker's playing way more, Carr's playing way more, Fiddler and Zapala are new, Richardson's new. So there's some of that too, where I think he's like, look, I need to have these guys ready to go. And they haven't been through this. They haven't been, meaning they haven't been through the grind of what it takes to win a conference championship, So that's what I think is going on. It's a combination of those things.
Yeah, I do also think, this is the longest win streak since 2018, 10 games. So obviously no one on this team has won 10 in a row in college.
Right.
It's been a while since the team has looked this good for this long period of time where they're running off wins. And so he knows what happens to his teams in the past.
Yes.
And so he's going to try and prevent that from happening to these guys who have not dealt with success like teams did in distant past now.
Even those guys who I said are back in the same roles.
Yeah, they didn't have this sort of success.
They have not been through this. Jaden Akins has never been 6-0 in the Big Ten. He's never been on a team that was honestly in Big Ten title race. He's never been in one.
Yeah.
And I think this team, it's early, but I think this team looks like that it has the potential for that. So, it's all, this is a hell of a challenge. It's great that it's happening because I think it's actually great. We keep talking about this February gauntlet, and I personally think when you drill down a little bit into that schedule, that's slightly overstated, if only because of the games they get at home versus the games they get on the road. Like if they were going to West Lafayette and to Madison instead of the reverse in that stretch, I'd say, wow, but they're not.
Yeah.
So I think that I think it's good that they're getting the chance against a high caliber team a little bit before that kicks off.
And at home.
Let's get a level check now.
Yeah.
So it's a big one. I mean, it's been a while since Michigan State's been in a Big Ten regular season game that felt like it had these kind of stakes.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely you feel as though it's your point earlier that I think he definitely thinks he's got a team that's potential to be pretty special. And so he's kind of just start tightening the screws here as we move along. Whereas the last few years, it's been sort of, we just got to get in the tournament. That's been sort of that feel. Just we got to get this team.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dawson Garcia just hit a shot from half court to beat Michigan in overtime. He hit it from the logo. I'm serious.
Well, there's no better way to end a show than to say, down goes.
There you
down
go.
Go
a little bit of real life. This is an antiseptic. Right?
Minnesota. All right. So visit our sponsor at tffinots.com/support. You visit the Brothers Justin Gutters, Nudge Printing, or the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Also, you can find ways to support the show either financially, either one-time gifts with PayPal, Venmo, or recurring basis of Patreon or Substack. So down go the Wolverines. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.